What? Why are you shaking your head? You're welcome.
Hey guys, and welcome to the Week 9 UFL Breakdown. I'm here with Millionaire Maker winner, one of the winningest spring football DFS players of all time, Neil Orfield. Neil, how you doing this week?
I'm doing well. Yeah, as we discussed, my Timberwolves lost. They're playing again tonight. They are not looking great in this series with the Thunder, but happy to be here. Back to back Western Conference Finals for the first time in franchise history is pretty fun. And obviously the Brahmas are out of it. But we still have some UFL football to look forward to.
We do, yeah. UFL playoffs are set in stone. That's something me and Neil will talk about a little shortly here. Neil, I don't know about you. This is going to be a big week for talking about some motivations, maybe some weird rotations, a bit like an NFL Week 18 sort of slate. And we might be faced with that again in Week 10. What are your sort of general thoughts for slates like these?
Yeah, I'm not the biggest fan of these questionable motivation slates. I just like to know what teams' motivations are. I feel like it's easier to kind of predict what they might do when you just know what they want to do. This one it's sort of clean in that, like you said, we know the exact, like, there are 4 teams that are in the playoffs. There are 4 teams that missed the playoffs. I think I'm gonna kind of play it as though the 4 teams that are out are probably just gonna play to win anyway. Like, what do they have to lose in, like, it's not like the NFL where you have like these star players that you need to protect because they are worth so much to your franchise. Like in the UFL, it's just a league of trying to get players to the NFL anyway. So I think teams that are not going to be in the playoffs, to me, probably are still motivated to showcase their players, their best players, to the best of their ability. But still, we have 4 teams that are now in the playoffs, and I know you did a good breakdown of what you're expecting there. But yeah, it's not my favorite type of slate.
Yeah. I actually really like these slates. I always love sort of the weird end of season slates. I think the edges are generally much bigger. And it also means, just generally speaking, industry projections will be much more fragile. So that gives you room to go a little outside the box, like you and Scott Barrett do every week during the NFL season. Shout out Fantasy Dog Pound in the chat, stopping by. Great best ball content from that guy. So definitely check him out if you're in the best ball streets. Of course, though, if you're in the UFL streets, betting any player props, playing any DFS, I think you're going to want to subscribe to either our UFL package or our all-in package over on fantasypoints.com. Keep in mind, all-in includes UFL, college football, NFL, and the Fantasy Points data suite. Here's what you get in our UFL product: projections for every player in every game, main slate DFS ownership projections, a weekly written breakdown of the DFS slate that's currently live on the site and is behind the paywall, so subs only on that this week. You also get access to our paywalled UFL DFS Discord, where I provide notes on coach speak, insider info, and breakdowns of single game showdown and Sunday only DFS slates. This week is actually another Saturday only DFS slate, so keep that in mind. Also get our official picks for player props. So far this year, we've gone 37 and 30 for a plus 20% ROI, only $70 for the rest of the season. Neil, before we get into these games, I did want to have a quick discussion on UFL championship odds. As we've already mentioned, the playoffs are set in stone here. I think there are some interesting bets that we could make. I just pulled up the DK odds. This is what we're currently looking at. Michigan Panthers are the favorite. They're plus 175. St. Louis Battlehawks are plus 225. Birmingham Stallions are plus 320. And the DC Defenders are plus 425. I would also encourage everybody to shop around because you can probably find better numbers on each of those teams individually if you look across books. Like I saw plus 500 on DC over on ESPN Bet. They don't take a ton, but like I said, still worth shopping around. What do you generally think about, UFL championship odds? Who do you like at those odds I just rattled off? Any thoughts?
DC is kind of interesting. I think DC probably my favorite of that group, being the worst odds, because I think they're just as likely as anybody. Like, it's a team that has been together for many years now. They have a defense that has been struggling recently, but I think generally has been pretty good. They have obviously an offense, like I said, that has just been together for a long time. So yeah, I think DC kind of stands out to me as the one that I'd be most likely to bet there. How about you?
Yeah, no, I feel the exact same way. I think DC, plus 425, like I said, on ESPN Bet, plus 500 is a pretty strong bet here. I think the toughest part to quantify right now about the UFL playoffs, and this is something that I probably should have said before we even got into this discussion, is while these 4 teams are still battling for conference championships in the USFL division and the XFL division, respectively, Birmingham's going to get a home game no matter what. St. Louis is going to get a home game no matter what. Unfortunately, and this is just, I guess, the nature of AAA football, Neil, they could not secure either the DC Defenders Field, I believe it's Audi Field, or the Michigan Panthers. They play at Ford Field. They could not secure either venue for a playoff game for those teams. So unfortunately, neither of those teams, regardless of what happens, will be able to play a home game here. And I think that's kind of the toughest part to quantify because, St. Louis, I kind of think they're the worst of these four teams, but they have by far the best home field advantage. I mean, they're probably the only team that I would give a full, 2.5, 3 points, whatever the standard home field boost is, to, because they draw great crowds. So that's really what I'm sort of struggling with when I bookmake these. But yeah, I like DC, plus 425, I think is easily my favorite. They've kind of been hovering around there the last few weeks. I also think Birmingham at plus 320 is really interesting. They're pretty beat up overall, but I do expect Alex Magoo to come back at least for the playoffs, which could be a pretty big boost. And even if he can, I mean, Jamar Smith has played well. There's a chance they could get Corral back. Cookus has been fine. So regardless of their quarterback situation, 3-1 on Birmingham, the team that's won basically every spring football championship ever, also doesn't feel too bad to me. So certainly some value on the board. Personally, though, I really want Michigan to win. I got Michigan at plus 500 a couple weeks ago, plus 800 in week 2, and then plus 650 before the season started. So I have a pretty good Michigan position. Rooting for them overall, but I'm also adding a little bit to DC. Let's talk some ball, though. St. Louis Battlehawks at the San Antonio Brahmas. St. Louis is favored by 6.5. This opened at 8, got bet down in favor of San Antonio. Total here is 41.5. Neil, thankfully, all our totals this week are over 40 points. But for this game, any bets that you like? This line feels about right to me.
Yeah, I think it feels about right too. I don't think that I have any. Let's see. 7.5 point. I'm reading your article. I always go here, and I know it changes sometimes after you've written it, but you have.
Yeah, it moved about a point. I'll be sure to update those totals after the show.
Okay. No, I think this feels fair to me.
Yeah, I think so too. If I had to pick something, I'd probably take St. Louis minus 6.5. I mean, there are some.
I probably would too.
Potential rotational risks with them, but San Antonio is going to be starting Kellen Mond, and I think Kevin Hogan might be better than Mond. I mean, Mond didn't really show anything in the handful of starts that he had. Let's talk injuries here. Anthony McFarland, Matthew Sexton, Justin Smith, and Kevin Hogan are all out due to injury. Like I mentioned, Kellen Mond will start for the Brahmas. That's really the big news here. Other big news, Neil, is that, like I said, we don't really know what St. Louis is going to do in this situation. Anthony Beck has never coached his team in like a truly meaningless game like this is going to be here. And unfortunately, excuse me, during his press conference, nobody asked him about what his plans were for rotations, which sort of adds another wrench here. My thought is that we get something close to full games from Max Duggan and the rest of these starters. I wouldn't be surprised if, especially Jacob Sailors, they laid off of just a little bit. I honestly wouldn't be shocked if the coaching staff was like, oh yeah, Jacob Sailors actually means a little bit more to this offense than even Max Duggan does. Brandon Silvers is the backup quarterback, and I think that's a guy they have a lot of confidence in. He was AJ McCarron's backup, or I believe he was the QB3 because they also had Manny Wilkins in the 2024 season. So, Neil, with that sort of out of the way here, how do you feel about Max Duggan? I've discounted his projection slightly to, again, account for these potential rotational risks. I believe I gave him about 85% of dropbacks, close to his usual rushing workload. What are your thoughts here? I mean, if he plays a full game, this is a pretty good spot. Like you said a week or two ago, San Antonio's defense is kind of like the Coors Field of the UFL right now. I mean, season-long stats, even last 3-4 week stats, they look pretty poor. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, Max Duggan, pretty interesting. It's going to come down to ownership. I mean, how much you want to play him. And I think he's probably going to play most of the game. I mean, like you said, it's kind of impossible to guess, but it seems like a pretty good bet. If he's getting 11% ownership, that seems like a player that I'm going to want a good amount of exposure to. I'll probably be overweight to 11%, I would guess, just a little bit. Obviously, the tricky part with Duggan is stacking, and like you get such an advantage when you can stack and get multiple players from the same stack together. So when you get one of these guys who he doesn't pass that much. Last week, what do we see? 4 targets was the max any receiver got from him. And I think that's probably the most we've seen in a game of any Max Duggan game. So I don't love that. But at 11% ownership, I do think I probably come in a little bit overweight to Duggan. Probably not a ton, just because of the lack of stacking options. But I still probably will stack him in general and just hope that one of these guys scores a touchdown, and that's part of the reason to win. Particularly because we do have so many motivational issues where it's like it's sort of harder to project some of these other teams. So maybe we don't get those, or we can't expect as many of those like 25-30 point games. Like if we do get 15 points out of Ja'Cory Pearson or Hakeem Butler, like that might be enough on a week like this, because some of the other receivers who do well maybe only play a half a game or 3/4 of a game or something.
Yeah, I certainly think that's a fair point. I also think, just generally speaking, this is going to be a week where people want to dip into sort of the bad teams a little bit more, lean into maybe a team like San Antonio a little bit more, just because we have a little bit more confidence in their rotation than, say, like especially DC, who's the big question mark that we'll talk about a little bit later today. But yeah, I mean, Duggan plus Butler, I think, is still a pretty tempting stack here. I'm still in a similar spot to, what I said last week, where probably half my Duggan lineups will be unstacked. I also like Duggan with Jacob Saylors. Jacob Saylors' target share has picked up again the last few weeks. He was at 14.3%, same as Frank Darby last week. So certainly encouraging that he's getting a little bit more of the design work. There's sort of a lull there when Max Duggan first started, where all his screens just disappeared for some reason, but they seem to be back on track with that. I'm probably only looking at Pearson and Butler here. I mean, Darby projects as an okay value. Gary Jennings is also okay. I prefer the guy. I mean, Butler's overall my favorite, just because he can absolutely break the slate. 7,800, 3% ownership, I think is very reasonable. Do you have like a strong preference? I don't know that I necessarily do. It'd probably be like lean Butler as mine, a little bit of Pearson, and then maybe I'll have like one or two lineups with a Darby or a Jennings.
I think that sounds exactly right. I love Pearson finally at a playable price. Like for a while, I was just like, man, he's just like, how do you play Ja'Cory Pearson in this offense with his current role when he's 6,800? I think was last week. So this is a pretty big drop in price. Makes him, I think, playable at this point. But yeah, I still agree with you that Butler is just the one who's more likely to put up a score that you really want to have. So yeah, it would be that order: Butler, and then a bit of Pearson. Maybe I'll have a little bit of Frank Darby, and that's probably the cutoff for me.
Yep. That all sounds good to me. Let's talk backfield. Last week was, same as always with this backfield. Jacob Saylors, 87% of backfield weighted opportunity. Jarvion Howard, only 13%. This week, I think, could be a little bit different. Like I said earlier, Jacob Saylors is very, very important to this team. I do think they have some confidence in Jarvion Howard. And I also think if you were going to back off the starters at all, your running back who's getting 20 touches a game would probably be the guy that you'd want to lay off of a little bit. And, maybe Max Duggan to some extent, because he is running the ball so much and he throws his body around to such an incredible extent. But I really like Jarvion Howard at 4,500 as sort of a speculative dart throw, especially in this great matchup, especially in a game where St. Louis is favored by about a touchdown. I mean, this could turn into a blowout too. Like, even if we're wrong and Jacob Saylors, they intend to play him the entire game, if St. Louis is up 20 points going into the fourth quarter, that might just be all Jarvion Howard. And at 4,500, that's a fairly tempting price tag. It's interesting too on this slate, Neil, because Tony Jones stayed at 4K after last week when, he played about 40% of snaps. So I think a lot of people are going to play Tony Jones. I think he's going to be quite popular. And to me, the obvious contrarian pivot is to Jarvion Howard.
Yeah, I'm 100% on board with everything you said. I'm on board with both of them. I mean, Jacob Saylors, I think 9,500. Good to see the price come down. And the price comes down in the perfect matchup for Saylors also. So everything looks really good there. And then, of course, then you throw in the wrench of not knowing motivations and how much he's going to play. But I think both are very much in play. My guess that I come in overweight to 27% on Jacob Saylors. I will certainly mix in a bit of Jarvion Howard as well. What we have the ownership at, like nothing there. Obviously, it's not going to be nothing with both of us playing him.
I'll probably bump him to like 3 to 4%. I'd be pretty surprised if he was higher than, say, 5% owned, because, like I said, Tony Jones is probably a better play.
Yeah. But I also I was debating whether I'm going to say, like, would I make a rule that you can't play them together? And I don't think I will. I think that I'm willing to play both of them together because of Jarvion Howard's price tag, and because they might just maybe they just run it down the Brahma's throats the entire game.
Yeah, I mean, this could be a game where the backfield combines for like 40 DraftKings points, in which case you probably will want both guys given the reasonable price tags. And, like Neil pointed out, 9,500 for Jacob Sailors is a pretty nice price tag. Even if you told me for certain he's only playing 3 quarters, I would still be pretty interested in a 9,500 Jacob Sailors. And this isn't like an incredible running back slate. I mean, we have Jayshon Corbin, who's an awesome play, but, outside of that, it's kind of across the board. So, yeah, certainly like that. I think we got everyone covered there. Let's move on to the San Antonio Brahmas. Kellen Mond is starting, and that's not necessarily good. I mean, this offense has just not been particularly good all season. This is a tricky team to decipher, Neil. I don't know if I'm going to get to any Mond. I'll submit 35 teams, which is the max in the $20. I don't know, maybe 1 or 2 Mond teams. He's easy to stack, which is good. I'll throw this out there. No Justin Smith this week. Justin Smith is hurt. San Antonio only going into this game with 3 outside wide receivers. So it'll be Jontre Kirkland, D. Anderson, and Jacob Harris. We've seen Jacob Harris just completely disappear for reasons largely unknown, which means that we can, roughly bank on Jontre and D. Anderson being out there for probably a full-time route share. That makes the stack fairly easy. I'm largely off these slot wide receivers, Greg Ward and Marquez Stevenson. The tight ends have been playing a lot in the slot. Even last week when it was only Stevenson, he only earned about a 55% route share playing exclusively in the slot. That's not great in an offense that doesn't move the football at all. I don't think you could talk me into any Stylianos at 5K, maybe on a 2-game slate, but this is the Friday game, so we don't really have that luxury. Where are you at on Kellen Mond and some of these pass catchers, Neil?
Yeah, I'm not sure if I get to any Mond. If I do, it probably won't be all that different from the field. I mean, the nice thing you can say about Mond is he is 7,800. This is a guy that come into the season I thought was going to be a star in this league. Sadly, that has not appeared to be the case. Obviously, a small sample size, so it's possible that maybe now with being in the league a little bit longer, being on the sidelines, maybe work out some of those nerves. It's possible he'll come out and be a little bit better. So I don't hate it at 7,800 and 3% ownership. But I'm not like I really want to play this guy. It's like I might get to a couple shares. I would love it as a late swap. Like if this were a game that were happening later in the week, I would have loved it. But as a play going into the slate, I don't imagine I'll have much. I'll probably play 1 or 2 Mon lineups, just take some shots there. But not going to be a huge stand for me just because, like you said, he has not been good in the limited sample that we've seen. As far as the pass catchers, I think Kirkland is fine at 7,200. Like that's a playable price tag, and 2% ownership. Like not somebody again that I'm going to be playing in a ton of lineups, but they do take some of those home run shots to Kirkland. So hit on one of those, it could work out. I agree with you. Don't think I'm playing any Stylianos. And then D. Anderson, would be my favorite of the San Antonio receivers at 4,600, just a fair price tag for D. Anderson, but getting the most ownership also. So no like standout plays to me that I really want to play a ton of here, but I think 13%, if the field's getting a 13% D. Anderson, I'm probably not too far off from that number.
Yeah, that's roughly where I'm at too. I think D. Anderson pretty clearly the best play here. We've seen, in his limited action, get some end zone targets, get some deep targets, which is certainly encouraging. And also, he's just going to be out there a lot, and San Antonio is going to be forced to throw. I think the one bull case that you can make for Kellen Mond is that we really haven't seen him in the Peyton Pardee version of this offense. So maybe that is just, outright better. It's hard to say though, because I don't necessarily know that Pardee's offense has been that much better than AJ Smith's offense. But for what it's worth, when Kellen Mond was playing, it was in AJ Smith's offense. And by AJ Smith's own admission, that was sort of a neutered version of what he wanted to run because, Wade Phillips, I guess, wanted him to run more pro style sets, more 12 personnel and stuff. And that was sort of why they had that falling out there. So, I'll probably play 1 or 2 Mond lineups. The stack is really straightforward. My other fear with playing Mond is that I kind of think every Mond team is just going to be Mond plus D. Anderson. Which is, it's not too difficult to get different elsewhere, but that is just kind of a bit of a boring stack, I guess. And, makes playing Mond just a tad less tempting to me. You can mix in some Kirkland at 2% ownership to get a little different, but he's expensive and we just really haven't seen a ceiling from basically any of these Brahmas pass catchers all season. It's been really tough. I don't think we need to spend any more time on these pass catchers. Some of these other guys would be interesting if they had like a showdown or a 2-game slate, but we do not. Backfield though, Jayshon Corbin. what a workload last week. 80% of backfield weighted opportunity, 84% snap share, 30 total opportunities, 25 rush attempts, 5 targets for Jashaun Corbin. This was the single best workload by weighted opportunity of any running back this year. Over his last 2 games, he's averaging over 29 DraftKings fantasy points per game. Neil, Corbin's just like a great play. He's going to get the pass volume. He's going to get the rush volume. I don't think they have any confidence in Aiden Robbins outside of inside the 5 stuff. And Jaden Sheridan hasn't been with the team very long. And, like we saw with Wes Hills on Memphis a few weeks ago, these new addition running backs can come in and play pretty quick because, like I mentioned, they stand next to the quarterback. The quarterback can just tell them to play. They opted not to go that route with Jaden Sheridan. They just said, Corbin, this is your backfield. This is the workload I was hoping Anthony McFarland would get. I mean, I can't imagine the numbers McFarland would be putting up in this offense, but I mean, Corbin's looked very good. And like I said, the workload has just been absolutely incredible. Where are you at on Jashaun Corbin? Because he's probably going to be the most popular play of the slate and could push for 50% ownership.
Yeah, I imagine I'll end up quite a bit underweight on Jashaun Corbin.
Okay.
It won't be. I understand everything you're saying makes sense. It's just the ownership is coming in so high at 43%, and this is a guy that, like you said, he's looked really good the past 2 weeks. But I don't want to completely forget up until like the first 6 weeks of the season or whatever, he was really bad. Was not all that involved in the passing game. Now, obviously, that part I think is clearly changed. Like he's been targeted 8 times over the past 2 weeks. But now we have Kellen Mond coming in, and I don't really recall Kellen Mond targeting his running backs very much early in the year. Maybe that changes in this new offense. Maybe it's just the change in offensive philosophy, and maybe he will pass more to Jashaun Corbin. But that has been something that has really raised the floor for Corbin the past couple of weeks. He's had a lot of those really long receptions, and it's been really, really encouraging for him. But he did so I think I cited this stat in the Discord at Fantasy Points. I think it took like the first 5 weeks, he had like 34 carries for 109 yards. And then he broke out that first week where he got some ownership with 12 carries for 109 yards. So he had that one game, and it was really just came down to he had one rush at the end in the fourth quarter.
Yeah.
I mean, it wasn't garbage time or anything. So I don't want to discount the run, but outside of that run, he was at 9 fantasy points. Then he had a run that netted him 15 more in the fourth quarter. Last game, like you said, the workload has been awesome for Jashaun Corbin, but I think it's possible that he reverts back to 2.5 yards per carry. If he just doesn't get those home runs, he could revert quite a bit. So I think when you factor in he's got a quarterback in there who I don't think targeted, maybe you can correct me on that, but I don't think targeted his running backs a ton.
I will correct you on that. So
Okay.
Kevin Hogan's been at an 18.5% running back target share. Kellen Mond not too far behind, 17.6. So both of those numbers would actually rank top 4 over the full season. Okay. I don't think there's going to be too much of a drop off in running back targets, and I'm not really projecting much of one this week.
Okay, well that's good then. So points in his favor that he will be, targeted probably a handful of times, and that's really valuable for running back because those are usually going to be low ADOT targets that he's really likely to catch. But he's expensive enough that you really do need, 20 fantasy points. Maybe not 20, but you need 15 fantasy points is what you want. And I think there's a better than 60% chance that he doesn't get there personally. So I think I end up underweight, and I'd rather just take some shots on other running backs that I think have similar upside, who are getting a lot less ownership and some of them cheaper as well. So I think I end up underweight to the field, but I know I saw you wrote him up as your favorite running back on the slate. And my first instinct was gross. I hate it. And then the more I looked at it, I was like, I mean, you're not wrong. He probably is. Yeah. He probably is the best running back on the slate. But also I'm not super enthused about it. I probably go elsewhere more than the field does.
Yeah, in cash formats, very small field stuff, I kind of think you have no choice but to play Jashaun Corbin. I'm a little interested in maybe getting away from him in the I think it's $180 high stakes with 70 or 75 total entries, because he's going to be really popular there, maybe 60 or 65%. Could be interesting to get away from him in that spot. And I definitely do appreciate your bear case. I mean, part of the thought that I had on Corbin was, and I imagine I'll match the field. I might even be a tad higher than the field in my my $20 lineups. But I mean, this offense sucks. He could get 30 carries, and if they gain, I mean, San Antonio gaining 80 total yards is definitely in the range of outcomes here. This offense is really bad and can be really bad. Maybe the floor's still strong because of his target workload, but I wouldn't be shocked if he ended this game with 7, 8, 9 DraftKings points, especially if San Antonio only scores between like 7 and 13 points or something like that. So that would be the bear case. And I certainly do think that has some legs here in this spot. All right, nothing really else to talk about for this one. Let's move on to the Arlington Renegades at the Memphis Showboats. This is our first of 2 Saturday games. Thankfully, Neil, no simultaneous kickoffs. I believe this game kicks off at noon. Second game is at 3 p.m., if I remember correctly. So, yeah, we will be able to watch both games. Don't have to worry. I think it was like the Fox Sports app or something like that I had to download. And then they gave me a free preview, and then I had to log into my TV provider. It was quite the headache. I really did not appreciate that, but thankfully we're avoiding that this week. Arlington, 4.5 point favorite against Memphis. The total here is 40.5. This really seems about right to me. I don't think I have any leans on this line. Do you?
Yeah, I don't think that I really do either. Let me look. No real lines. I think I would take, if anything, I like Memphis, like Arlington better than the spread that we have here. So I might take a little bit more, because I anticipate both teams are going to be playing their guys fully. Yeah. And I think Arlington is significantly better. So I guess I would take the Arlington side with the points.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I'll probably lay off. This is a tricky one. I don't think I have any leans. On the injury front, Tyler Vaughns and Davion Smith were both limited on Tuesday, but they practice in full on Wednesday. So I don't really expect any limitations there. On the Memphis side, Jonathan Adams was limited on Wednesday. He's worth keeping an eye on. He also had, they didn't even give him a DNP designation for Tuesday. It was just like ... for his Tuesday designation. I don't know what that means. Maybe it's out, totally absent from the facility with a personal thing. I've never seen that on the injury report so far, so I'm not really sure what's going on with Jonathan Adams, but we should get some clarity tonight, because we will get both the Saturday depth charts later today, which is very helpful. Regarding rotations here, so important to note, Jim Turner, during his midweek media availability, mentioned that when it came to the quarterback situation, he was happy with how Troy Williams played, but they were either going to go with EJ Perry or Dresser Wynn for this game this week. And then I would imagine, between Perry and Wynn, say they give Perry the start, it will probably be Wynn in week 10. I think they wanted to give each of these 3 quarterbacks a final opportunity. Also, interesting note from Jim Turner's midweek media availability, on the broadcast caught this. He asked Troy Williams if he should bench him during the game, and Troy Williams said, "Don't do that." And I guess Jim Turner said he said it very confidently, so I decided not to bench him, which I thought was hilarious. Jim Turner's the ultimate 55-year-old Marine dad. The way that he talks is so stern and straightforward. I really like his personality. On the Arlington side, Bob Stoops, for one, just seemed very disappointed in how the team ended the season. I mean, obviously, that was a heartbreaking ending for them in DC. There was a hilarious moment where a reporter post-game asked him what happened with the 12 men on the field penalty that they had later in that game. And he said, "We had 12 guys on the field. We're supposed to have 11. I don't know what more you want to know about that." Regarding playing time, though, he was asked about potentially benching Luis Perez for Holton Ahlers. He did say maybe. For what it's worth, last season in week 10, this was a meaningless game for Arlington. They did not make the playoffs. Luis Perez played every single snap. And I believe that was a team with Lindsey Scott, who is a much more interesting prospect overall than Holton Ahlers. So I'm loosely expecting a full game for Perez this week. I also think the rest of the starters will play the full game. Someone else asked Stoops, "Hey, are you going to, maybe play some of these younger guys who haven't played as much to try to scout for next year?" And he was like, "No, absolutely not. We're focused on winning games. We want to get the guys who deserve it film." So like I said, I think, full starters across the board. There's a slight risk with Perez just because Stoops didn't shoot that down, but historical tendencies here. Plus, I think just to wash the taste of this most recent loss out of his mouth, he's really going to want to win this game. That's sort of just the impression that I got from Bob Stoops and his attitude from these pressers this week. With that, sort of overarching note out of the way, Neil, how do you feel about Luis Perez in this spot? I think there are definitely more tempting game environments here, but I mean, we can't forget, Perez is always viable for that 3-touchdown, 300-yard performance, and those double stacks can certainly pop in that instance, especially on a slate where, we do have some quarterback rotation question marks.
Yeah, it's interesting because I want to play Luis Perez as one of the few quarterbacks we can have some confidence in. Like I said, I'm taking Arlington with the points here. I do think that they're pretty likely to do well here. But then you look at Memphis's defense, only 139 passing yards allowed per game over the past 3 weeks on average. It's Jaron Horton, a guy that everybody's been kind of thinking he's going to be a really strong defensive coordinator, and now it's showing up in the results here. They're just not allowing a ton of yards there, so I can't be that enthusiastic about Luis Perez. I still think like he's a guy that I want to have some exposure to as one of the quarterbacks that I think probably plays a full game. Based on the evidence we have, he's only getting 7% ownership. I think I'll probably have close to that. I think maybe I'll have over 7%. Not by a ton though. Like I think it's a fine play, but it's a tough matchup. So not overly enthusiastic, but and like you said, we do have some risk that he's going to. I mean, at the very least, like Holton Naylor is obviously always a guy that can come in like in the red zone, like they did last week. They brought him in at the 1 yard line. Yeah, so it's just there's that at the very least. But yeah, I think at 7% ownership, we've seen the blow up games from Luis Perez in the past, and the nice thing about him in some ways is when he goes off, so do his receivers. So you know that you can stack them up and just pay off in a big way with the full double triple stacks.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, speaking of these wide receivers, I was sitting and thinking about it last night as I was writing my article, and I don't really have any strong leans relative to, my projections and the ownership here. I really think this is just a, straight up mix and match type situation. For GPPs, I might give like a little bit of an extra projection boost to a guy like Javonte Payton, just because he gets those deep targets. I mean, he was so close to a monster game last week.
Yeah, he was.
DC. I had a couple showdown teams. We actually had a sub win that showdown for $2,000, which was sweet. But I had a couple teams that were like right on his tails that had Javonte Payton, and man, there were some deep shots that had me holding my breath there. He's the only guy that like when I go in and make my lineups, I'll probably manually bump his projection up just a little bit. Everyone else, though, I mean, it really does just feel kind of like a mix and match situation for me. I think the lineup that I'll probably try to avoid having too much of, if I play like 5 Perez lineups, I don't want too much Perez plus Canella plus Vaughns, just because that's going to be easily the most popular way to play Perez. So I definitely want to mix in, Burnett, Peyton, Winstead, but largely just mix and match. Do you have anything to add there?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. You look at their targets from last week, and we talk about like St. Louis. They maxed out at 4 targets, and I think, like I said, that might be the most anybody's been targeted in a game with Max Duggan. You look at just the targets from just last week: Deontay Burnett 8 targets, Sal Cannella 8 targets, Tyler Vaughns 8 targets, JP Payton 7 targets, Day Hunter 7 targets. Just like everybody really. And then Isaiah Winstead. It's funny. You listen to the broadcast; they referred to Isaiah Winstead as wide receiver 1. I was like, is he? Like, why are you calling him wide receiver 1? But you can make the argument for any of these guys basically. I think I'm with you. I do like, Isaiah Winstead at 6,100, I believe, and like 1% ownership. I like that, but I am with you. I think it'll be mixing and matching. Maybe I get to more than I think I will, just because I want to try different iterations of these double stacks. 6,100. Isaiah Winstead seems pretty good to me. JP Payton seems pretty good to me. Just several pretty strong plays here. But yeah, for the most part, it is like, I think Sal Cannella 8,000 seems fair. Tyler Vaughns 8,100 seems fair. It'll be mixing and matching for me as well.
Yep, I am right there with you. In terms of this backfield, I think we have 2 very, very viable plays in Day Hunter and Tony Jones. In terms of snaps, these 2 were actually pretty close to like a dead even committee. Day Hunter was at 57% of snaps, Tony Jones at 41%. But in terms of raw weighted opportunity, Day Hunter at 77%, Tony Jones 23%. Now, it is worth noting Tony Jones actually did have the 1 goal line carry that this backfield got awarded. I saw your message in Discord, Neil. I thought he scored on that play.
Easily. He's easily
Naylor's
scored.
Got the next touchdown, which was weird. And like that hurt me a lot in DFS because I was way overweight on Tony Jones.
Me too.
They also didn't move Tony Jones' price, which is pretty surprising. Like generally when you see a guy come in min priced, like 8-10% ownership, got a decent workload, scored 5 fantasy points, you generally at least see like a $500 price increase. But no, he's still at 4K flat, which was pretty surprising to me. And that makes him an extremely viable play this week. I think you can play both of these guys together. I really don't mind that. What are your thoughts overall in this backfield? I'll probably have a good chunk of both guys.
Yeah, agreed. I think they both look really phenomenal. We were he totally scored on that. I didn't they didn't even challenge it. Maybe they're out of challenges, but I was like, they should at least look at this. He very clearly was over the goal line.
I thought it was weird too. On the broadcast, they didn't show the pylon cam from that side.
I know
they only had the camera angle from the side that wasn't really going to give you a good view there. That was very confusing to me. I didn't really understand that. Maybe Stoops wasn't worried because he just knew, hey, Holton Ahlers can score.
Yeah.
No one's DFS lineups will be impacted at all. We'll be good.
Yeah. Anyway, enough complaining, I suppose. Yeah, I agree with you. Both are great plays. I mean, love the workload there for Day Hunter. Like I said, I mean, 7 targets last week for Day Hunter, 54% route participation. That is very promising. And then Tony Jones, just that price tag is way too low, allows you to pay up elsewhere in your lineup. I agree with you. I think you can play them together. Yeah, everything looks pretty good here. I don't know if I get to. I might get to where we're at. We have Day at 36% ownership. I think he's a pretty similar play to Jayshon Corbin. Should have a pretty big workload here. Very expensive. You need a lot to go right. It's not a great matchup here with St. Louis, who I think is one of the best defenses in the league. Let's see, just over the past couple weeks, 97 rushing yards per game, which is I guess third worst matchup just over the past 3 weeks, I guess. But yeah, it's a tough matchup, and who knows if Tony Jones earns more of a role here. But I think you can make a case for either of them. Tony Jones being 4,000 and potentially getting more of a workload. Yeah, I think two of the stronger running back plays on the slate.
Yeah, I'm loosely anticipating like a 60-40 split here, sort of in line with how snaps were last week. And yeah, like you said, both really strong plays. Let's move on to the Memphis side of things. I'm loosely anticipating this will be EJ Perry. Again, we will get word on this tonight. So whether it's EJ Perry or Dresser Wynn, I definitely anticipate that guy will play the full game, barring injury or disastrous play. For the purposes of this discussion, Neil, let's assume it's EJ Perry. I don't necessarily think there's a huge difference between these guys in terms of how they would impact the spread or the total or their, respective pass catchers. EJ Perry probably has a little more fantasy juice because he is a much better runner with the football. And we've also seen some massive ceiling games from EJ Perry where he actually just looks great and throws for 300 yards and runs for another 40 or 50. He's good for maybe one of those out of every 8 to 10 starts. And outside of that, he's a slightly below league average starter. Where are you at on, Perry or I guess Dresser Wynn if he ends up starting? Pass catchers here are a little bit more interesting discussion, but curious what you think of the quarterback first.
Yeah, so EJ Perry is 8,400. Arlington, not a great matchup. They are, I think, one of the best defenses in the UFL, so don't totally love the matchup there. But yeah, if you throw in a little bit of rushing upside, he's only 8,400. They do have they have a strong receiving core there, so I kind of like it at 5% ownership. I imagine I'll have at least a couple shares of EJ Perry, assuming it is EJ Perry. And Dresser Wynn. I don't know if I would get to Dresser Wynn. I think if it is EJ Perry, I guess he's 7,900. He's moved down quite a bit. I'd probably have, I guess, a little bit of either of them just because of the price tags. I'd prefer it to be EJ Perry. I think he's the one that I'd be more inclined to play over the field. Dresser Wynn, I don't know how much I will get to, even if he is a starter. But yeah, if it is EJ Perry, I think I'll have a couple shares. So 5%, I'll be close to the field, I think.
Yeah, that's roughly where I'm at too. Probably just a couple shares of Perry. I do like the upside a little bit there. And I also think, just overall, there's certainly some tempting pass catchers to pair him with, whether it's Kwame Lassiter, Dawood Davis, Jonathan Adams, Kyle Loxley, all of those guys are pretty viable. This is kind of similar to what we see in Arlington, where they're all earning, a decent number of routes, close to a full-time route share. It is funny though, because when you look at just week 8, there were not many routes because Memphis only ran 45 plays. All that said, though, I do think this is a pretty solid spot in a game where they're expected to trail. Loxley's projecting as sort of our top value overall. But yeah, Lassiter, Dawood Davis, who I wrote up as, sort of an impending potential blow up spot. 7K for Dawood, I think is pretty nice. We all know what Jonathan Adams can do. I don't know that you can necessarily go wrong with any of those guys. Overall, I'll probably prioritize mostly single stacks for EJ Perry, but I do think doubles are viable. Do you have anything to add there?
Yeah, no, I think that is exactly right. I do want to add that I think it's hilarious that he said he was happy with how Troy Williams played. You may recall before the game, that was one of the things that I was playing was I want to take the under on Troy Williams passing and the over on Day Hunter. And of course, the under on Troy Williams is the part that easily got there because he only threw for, I think, 36 yards
There
in
were
the
like
game.
no passing yards in that game. It was crazy.
But the problem is he was so bad that none of the receivers did anything either. You needed some quarterback who could get the ball to his receivers. Man, that was frustrating.
Yeah.
But yeah, I like Daywood looks like a pretty strong play. I love these plays where it's like, he has a talent, he has the opportunity here. He just hasn't done it yet. So the ownership should be a little bit muted as a result. But we know that he has that breakout potential. So yeah, I like Daywood quite a bit at 7,002% ownership. Kwame Laster, totally fair price tag. Jonathan Adams, assuming he plays, he's the one you said at the ... right? So we don't really know the status of Jonathan Adams. So we'll have to wait and see there. But yeah, once we know that, I think I'll be playing the starters.
Yeah, he was limited Wednesday, so we should find out about his status tonight. When it comes to the backfield here, neither Jalen Jackson or Deneric Prince are super tempting clicks to me. I think, the most encouraging thing for Prince is that his price tag is fairly reasonable, 6,600. And he was still earning 68% of backfield weighted opportunity on a 62% snap share last week. So, still looking like 60-40, maybe 65-35 in terms of this split favoring Prince. I do worry about that maybe changing with Jalen Jackson, having some strong runs last week. Deneric Prince only scored 5.5 DraftKings points. Jackson finished with 13.6 because he was just much more efficient as a runner here. Neil, I don't know that I'm going to be able right now. We have Prince projected for 21% ownership. I might bring that down just a tad because I would imagine everyone's just going to want to find a way to pay $600 more for Jayshon Corbin, who is a much better play, or $1,100 more for Day Hunter, who's a much better play, or you pay down for a guy like Tony Jones and save yourself $2,500. Still though, he's viable. What do you think about Deneric Prince?
Yeah, I don't think that I get to either of them unless the ownership comes down quite a bit. Like the only time, the only way I would have a lot of interest is if we get like Deneric Prince at 5% ownership. Suddenly, I would have interest. But at 20%, even if he's getting like 12%, I'm probably not interested in playing. I just don't really see the upside there. It's a really tough matchup. So yeah, I'm pretty out on this backfield.
Yeah, it makes sense. I might bump his ownership down, but I don't think I'll be able to get it lower than 14-15% would probably be the lowest reasonable number that I'd have out there. I'll probably play like 10 or 12%. Not too bad, paired with the Memphis defense. Like Neil noted, this defense is good. I also think, this defense is pretty good, or particularly good against the pass. They're by far the toughest defense by yards per attempt allowed over the full season. That's sort of Arlington's strength, is passing the ball. So, we could see a situation where maybe Memphis is able to hold a lead here and grind it out a little bit with Deneric Prince, but we also just haven't seen much of an upside from, these Memphis backs this season. So definitely don't want to go overboard on my Prince exposure. Will probably be in that like 10 to 15% range. And that may be where I end up lowering his projected number 2. All right. I think we got that game covered. We can move on to the second of our 2 Saturday games. It's the Michigan Panthers at the Birmingham Stallions. Michigan is favored by 0.5 point. So this is basically a pick 'em. Total here is 44.5. Neil, any bets that you like here?
I probably like the under, just given the questionable motivations. Like I think this is a game where pretty better odds than usual that they just don't really do a lot of scoring. That it's just kind of slow down the pace. Don't really go for those big home run shots with your starters. So I think it would be the under for me.
Yeah, I think that's reasonable. 44.5 does seem tad high given the questionable motivations. We will talk about that here in a second. Unfortunately, Bryce Perkins has been ruled out for this game, which is a bummer. I imagine they just want to make sure he is 100% for the playoffs. On the Birmingham side, Amari Rogers is back to practicing in full, so he should probably be good to go. Alex Magoo has been limited all week. I expect it to either be Magoo or Jamar Smith. I projected Magoo in. I'm sort of ready to change that to Jamar as soon as the depth chart comes out, but just keep that in mind. Okay, starting with the Michigan Panthers side of this game, it's looking like it's going to be Danny Etling. Other thing that I wanted to note for Michigan was, obviously they've asked their, various reporters that attend our UFL press conferences have asked Mike Nolan, like, so what are you thinking when it comes to playing guys for this game. And, Nolan said that as far as resting players goes, he hasn't made a decision. We still have 2 games. This game is important for winning the division. My game right now is that we will play this game with every effort to win the football game. But after this game, we will need to make a decision on week 10. So last year, for those who were with us in week 10, Nolan did sort of like a halvesies rest thing where he's, because these guys take a pay cut if they're inactive. It's like a $3,000 or $4,000 per game difference between being active and inactive. So he didn't want to punish any of his best players by, making them inactive and costing them like $4,000. So he still started those guys, but the backups ended up playing, say, like 60 or 70% of the snaps, and were, sort of the de facto starters in that contest. What's interesting here, Neil, is that Nolan's still talking about being motivated to win the division. And you might wonder, like, why does that matter if they're not going to get a home game? Well, he'll be able to call the coin toss. He pointed this out. And he said they'll be able to bring their interns potentially to Birmingham. Now, I don't know what the interns do. Maybe they make sure that, Bryce Perkins is properly listed on the depth chart, which might be what happened last week. But, yeah, it sounded to me like Mike Nolan actually cares about winning this football game, which was a little surprising. He did say this with like sort of an air of uncertainty because he was asking, like he said, he's in the process of asking the league, like, can we bring our interns, to the playoff game if we beat Birmingham and win the division? Will we still be able to call the coin toss? Will we still get the home locker room? That was another thing he mentioned. Kick Birmingham to the visitors' locker room, even though the game's in Birmingham. These are very, very subtle advantages, but Nolan seemed like genuine when he was like, oh yeah, this stuff matters to me. Obviously doesn't matter enough to push Bryce Perkins to play, but I think it does matter enough to the point that we can project these starters for their normal roles here. So like I said, it's going to be Danny Etling this week for the Panthers. Neil, with sort of all that out of the way, how do you feel about Etling in this spot?
Yeah, I think you laid it out really nicely. And I think that's probably the right read, that it sounds like they are motivated, and it's kind of hard to like be totally unmotivated, not try to win for 2 weeks and then turn it back on in the playoffs.
Yeah.
So it would be a little bit early to start tanking. Like you don't usually see NFL teams start tanking 2 weeks before the end of the season. They usually like go pretty hard until like the final week. And I would imagine it's kind of the same thing here. So I do think, yeah, we can probably count on Etling playing the whole game and the team trying to win here. As far as the matchup is really tough, just 152 pass yards per game allowed by the Birmingham defense over the past 3 weeks. So one of the tougher matchups out there. So don't love that for Danny Etling, and obviously doesn't have the skill that Bryce Perkins has. Kind of was a big detriment to this offense last week. Like they were just not moving the ball nearly as well. So I'm not like super enthusiastic about Danny Etling, even with a full workload at 9,500. Yeah, I don't think I get to. We've got the field at 12%. I imagine I come in light on that number. He does have receivers that we like, so I'll have some, but I think I'll probably be closer to like 10%. Maybe a little bit under the field there. I don't know. What do you think there?
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of in a similar spot to you. I think 10 to 12% feels about right for Danny Etling. You still want some exposure here. This is a talented offense. It's an offense that we've seen obviously move the ball very successfully. Sure, most of that has come with Bryce Perkins, but Etling, he likes to run a little bit. He can sling it a little bit, sort of like a league average, I think, spring football sort of quarterback, and in a fairly talented offense in, what could be a more of a shootout. At least the total suggests this is one of the better offensive environments of the slate. Plus it, should be a close game. I think those are all decent reasons to play Danny Etling. He's certainly far from my favorite quarterback play on the slate. When it comes to these pass catchers, this is still, like a lot of these teams, kind of the same stuff that we've seen in previous weeks. Malik Turner, Cioce Mariner, and Jalen Moore should take the majority of the reps here. And, if you need a cheap guy, you go with Jalen Moore. If you want sort of a lesser owned big play threat, you go with Cioce Mariner. And if you just want the best play, you go with Malik Turner. I'll probably be mostly single stacking Etling, but I do think the doubles are still viable. Do you have anything to add on these pass catchers here?
Yeah, I think I'm probably going to be light on Malik Turner just because he's 9,100. Again, I'm not
Mhm.
like I think the offense just not quite as good with Danny Etling. So at 23% ownership, I imagine I'll be a little bit underweight on Malik Turner. COC Mariner, you get a little bit of a discount in both ownership and price. So I think I'll probably be close to the 9% he's at. I think I'm going to continue to make the mistake of being overweight on Jalen Moore just because he is so cheap, 4,800. And it's been not great so far, but he's out there. I guess 61.5% of routes last week. Like that's a little bit of a drop, right? I mean, I feel like he's been
Yeah,
more. Maybe I'm
he's
wrong.
generally been in that 70% range. So I'm not projecting a significant drop compared to previous weeks. If he hangs out at 60% again these next few weeks, I might be a little bit concerned for the playoffs,
Yeah.
but pretty similar role to what we've seen previously.
Yeah, I think I'll probably be a little bit overweight just because we have like not a ton of ownership going there. I mean, we've got him at what 5% ownership. So my guess is I come in slightly overweight to that, but not in any significant way. I'm more bearish on this offense than obviously than I was with Bryce Perkins. Like it's just I'm not super enthusiastic about the pass catchers here.
Yeah, fair enough. I think if you're looking for like kind of a galaxy brain 2-game slate play, a guy like Gunnar Oaks could be a little bit tempting. He was at a 54% route share last week. They tend to like these tight ends a little bit more in the red zone too. So there is some touchdown upside with a guy like Oaks. Is he like reasonably priced? Let me see here. Oh, he's 3,000. Yeah. So for the 2-game slate, I actually think Gunnar Oaks is a pretty strong play. I won't get there on main. Yeah, I don't think I have anything else to add on these pass catchers. Backfield is a little less tempting because, Neil, like you said, we're just not moving the ball as well, or Michigan isn't. Last week, Toa Tawa was at 57% of weighted opportunity. Nate McCrary was at 43%. Backfield workload last week was only worth about 17 fantasy points. So that is a bit of a drop off to what we've seen in these weeks with Bryce Perkins, where the offense is moving the ball really, really well. They get a lot more red zone snaps, a lot more inside the 5 snaps, a lot more snaps just in general. Yeah, where are you at on this backfield? To me, Toa Tawa seems like a fine play. Doesn't particularly stand out. We know he has fantastic touchdown upside. I mean, 3 touchdowns is certainly in the range of outcomes. What do you think here?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Like I'm not really excited about it, but because he has that touchdown upside, and he's also 9,000, so not really easy to get there. But he's getting 14% ownership. I think that seems reasonable enough. It's a tough matchup, so there's a lot of downside here with the offense maybe not looking as great and the tough matchup. At 14%, I think I'm still maybe okay with 14. No, I think I probably come in underweight. Yeah, that's where I'm landing. I'm going to be a little bit underweight. I'll probably have some shares of Toa Tawa, but I think 14%, a little bit too much. And then Nate McCrary just getting 1% at 6,000. Maybe more of a 2-game slate play. I don't know how much I get there on the main slate, but probably a fine 2-game slate play.
Yeah, I think for the 2-gamer, you could definitely play both of these guys together. I mean, that would eat up a lot of salary, but I also think it would be pretty unique on a 2-game slate. So that is a bit of an angle. Overall, sort of after talking through all these guys, I think my favorite play on the whole for Michigan is just COC Mariner, on the hopes that he can, catch a couple long balls, and 9% ownership for him is pretty nice overall. Outside of that, I don't necessarily know that I'm going to make any dramatic stance relative to, sort of what we have projected here for ownership in Michigan. Let's move on to the Birmingham side of things. Neil, for the purposes of the spread and projections, I don't necessarily think there's a huge difference between Magoo and Jamar Smith. Jamar played pretty well last week. I also think Magoo would play well if he ends up going. Part of me sort of thinks they're going to try to save Magoo for week 10, maybe the playoffs. Other note on Birmingham, by the way, Skip Holtz has never rested in a meaningless game. So like out of all the playoff teams, the team that we can feel by far the most confident in not doing anything weird is Birmingham. Like there are no guarantees in spring football, but I feel like 99% sure that Skip Holtz is not going to rest here. He was playing like league MVP Alex Magoo in a meaningless week 10 game in the USFL. He doesn't care. He's still giving him goal line runs. Like nothing changes. He just doesn't believe in rest. He wants to give everybody the full workload. And, I think whoever ends up being listed as the starter for Birmingham is probably going to be my second favorite quarterback play on the slate behind Jalen McClendon. What do you think here, Neil, for the Birmingham quarterback situation between Magoo and Jamar Smith?
I'd like it better if it is Magoo. If
Yeah.
Magoo ends up playing, I'm going to be pretty enthusiastic about it. Jamar, I think it's an overstatement to say he played pretty well last week. Maybe I listened to the coach too much, just giving him a hard time the entire game. Like, if you can't make that throw, you can't play. It was just, I don't know. I thought it was pretty funny. I enjoyed having the access to hearing those conversations.
I was speaking more from a fantasy perspective,
Yeah.
not as much from a film perspective.
Sure. Getting 13% ownership. Yeah, I guess I like the ownership going there. Like, I think he's totally fine. I like Jamar Smith better than Danny Etlian, I would say. Like, I think I'm more likely to get there. So yeah, I guess I'm with you. I think he's a pretty strong play. I don't know if I would call him my second favorite quarterback on the slate, although as I'm looking through the quarterbacks, maybe he is. But I'll be a lot more enthusiastic about it if it is Alex Magoo getting the start. Okay. I would be very happy to play Alex Magoo. Of course, he'll probably get more than 13% ownership. But yeah, I think Jamar is a fine play at 13% ownership. I guess I do ultimately agree with you that he probably is the second best quarterback play on the slate. That's a bleak slate, I guess.
Yeah.
Part of the issue is the pass catchers just maxed out at, I guess, Jalen Camp got 6 targets last week. Nobody else had more than 4 targets last week. Nobody reached 70% route participation.
Classic.
It's just kind of a spread out offense here, which, yeah, I guess it kind of always has been. So that's a little bit tough. I guess I have to look at let me pull up your ownership projections on these guys. Deion Kane, I mean, we said it last week. He always has, like, he has probably the widest range of outcomes of receivers. Always, just like he's expensive, so he needs to get there, but like he comes in at low ownership because he's expensive and like a real threat to score less than 4 fantasy points at any given week. But he also has that home run upside like we saw last week. So I think I do kind of like Deion Kane. We saw it last week, the upside that he has here. If he does come in at 6% ownership, he seems like a pretty strong play to me. Davion Davis, the price tag is fine at 5,300. I can get there. Jay Sternberger, finally, he's kind of popular at this point at 4,500. Seems okay, but I probably come in at less than 15%. If now that the field is on him. Jalen Camp, actually, I mean, he's min priced and getting no ownership after being targeted 6 times last week. That to me is somebody that I want to take some shots on. He ran 63% of the routes, which is, up there with just about everybody on the team. So
yeah,
I think I'll play a bit of Jalen Camp. He's probably the one that I'll be the most overweight to the field on, at least.
Yeah, we have Camp at 4% ownership. It's a tricky projection, when a guy runs 60% of routes and earns a 21% target share, especially a guy who hasn't really been particularly involved throughout the season. I mean, we've generally seen, like, throughout Birmingham's history, the slot role is pretty valuable. The role that Deion Kane occupies on the outside is pretty valuable. And then the other outside wide receiver kind of just comes and goes, where there are games they're totally uninvolved, and then there are games they get peppered with targets. At 3,000, I definitely don't mind some Jalen Camp exposure, especially like you said. 60% route share is about as good as you'll see on Birmingham. Actually, another guy that I'm a little tempted by here, Davion Davis. I thought he would push for like an 80% route share last week. He was only at 63%, which is kind of his standard slot role. I think everyone's going to be a little bit, frustrated and might not want to go back to the well there, but 4 or 5% ownership on a guy like Davion Davis is a little bit tempting to me. Only other thing I wanted to note on when it comes to the Birmingham passing attack is that I'm sure I'll end up raising the projected ownership for whoever the starter is right now. Our projections sort of feed our ownership projections to some extent. So the fact that I'm projecting a bit of a split, because I'm not sure who the quarterback's going to be between Magoo and Jamar Smith, that is sort of artificially bringing ownership down. I would imagine whoever ends up as the starter will clock in closer to like 20 or 25% for quarterback ownership. So keep an eye out for those adjustments later tonight after we get the depth chart. Neil, when it comes to this backfield, thankfully we still have Ricky Person projected a little bit higher than CJ Maribel, my boy, but there just isn't a ton of juice to squeeze here. Last week, Person was at 8.2 weighted opportunities, 56% of backfield weighted opportunities, 10 total opportunities. CJ Maribel, 6.4 weighted opportunities, 11 total opportunities, 44% of backfield weighted opportunity. Snaps favored Maribel, routes favored Maribel, but again, Ricky's been running better. I think Ricky's the better player, slightly better touchdown upside as well for Ricky Person. Any temptation here? I'll probably have I don't know, somewhere like 5% of person, maybe 10% on main slate. 2-game slate, though, I think these guys are both quite interesting. What do you think?
Yeah, I think on the main slate, I don't go in with any exposure to either.
Okay.
I think Person is probably the one that, like, in a late swap situation, maybe I'll get to a little bit of Ricky Person.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just that the team has trouble running the ball, and they're going up against the best run defense in the UFL. Michigan allowing just 77 rush yards per game over the past 3 weeks. So I think the combination of Birmingham struggles with rushing and the matchup here, not a backfield that I'm particular, and the split, like, just like not a backfield that's particularly interesting to me. But in late swap situations, yeah, sure, I think either of them actually would be totally viable. Person being my favorite of the two, but yeah, like you said, on the 2-game slate, you just need to randomly get a pass interference in the end zone, rush it in from the 1 yard
Yeah.
line. Suddenly you're looking good. So yeah, on the 2-game slate, both viable. Still Person my preference, but neither of them are like players that I'm targeting.
Yeah, I think the best argument that you can make is like Birmingham's really been moving fast here. 68 plays per game since week 5. That would be, over the full season, that would be the spring football record. I believe they've actually passed DC at this point in
Ooh.
total raw plays per game, or, if not, the teams are very, very close. So the pace here, I think, is a good argument for Birmingham. Also, just the game environment being very strong. We could still see a guy, especially Ricky Person, having slightly better TV equity. We could see him emerge for like a 15 or 20 DraftKings point performance. But it is tough when it's a split, because it's really hard to see, say, like a 30-point game from either of these guys. I just really don't think that's going to happen. But yeah, for the 2-game slate, I'm sure I'll have a decent number of exposure to either guy. Certainly give a preference to my boy Ricky Person, though. Let's move on to this last game here. This is, I think, easily the most interesting game of the weekend. Also, probably the best game just from a straight up fantasy perspective. It's the DC Defenders at the Houston Roughnecks. DC is favored by 3. Total here is a season high, Neil, 45.5. I mean, this is incredible. What do you think about the line in this game? I'm a little tempted by the Houston side. We'll talk, DC's plans for potentially resting players here shortly. But what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I guess based on what you have told me already about DC's plans, I guess I'm a little bit tempted. I think it's probably more likely to be a stay away / take the under spot for
Yeah.
me. But I hear what you're saying, and I understand the temptation. I don't think that it's enough that I would probably bet it, but I think I'd be maybe inclined to bet the under. Yeah, I think that's probably my biggest lean.
Yeah, I certainly think that's fair. I don't feel strongly enough to think it's worth betting, but it is interesting if DC potentially rests. There could be some value on Houston +3. On the injury front, Braylon Sanders was limited on Wednesday with a back issue. Kiki Chisholm, Josh Peterson, and Lawrence Keys all missed practice for Houston on Wednesday. Definitely will need to monitor everyone's status here as we head into lock. Neil, we'll talk the DC side of things first. And, DC throughout the season has been easily one of the best teams just for overall fantasy purposes, a team that I've been, very aggressively stacking. I've loved to play Teamu. But we had this quote post-game from Shannon Harris. He was asked about resting players now that the playoffs are locked up. DC knows, they have no chance at a home game, because Audi Field is, I think, prioritizing an MLS game over the potential UFL game. But yeah, here was his quote on potentially resting players. That's the thought process at times. Unfortunately, we don't have that many practice squad guys. We still want to play guys. As a coaching staff, we will figure out how to monitor guys and their reps. Give some guys rest. Play guys on alternate series. I don't know. We will need to be creative with it. We will figure it out and be smart about it. To me, he's highlighting the obvious problem of these spring football rosters where you can't bench everybody. I mean, the rosters are just so thin. But you can do like what I said Michigan did in week 10 last year, where, the starters are still active. They still get their game checks. They still play a little bit so that they can get film. But the backups play significantly more. And Neil, I think out of every team in the playoffs, without a doubt, no team has more to lose from a quarterback injury than DC. I think the drop-off from Teamu to Mike DeLeo is massive. Even compared to like the drop-off from Perkins to Danny Etling, I don't think that's as dramatic as the drop from Teamu to their backup. So I'm sort of loosely anticipating some sort of a split. We don't necessarily know what that'll look like, and that makes it really hard to project. But Neil, I'll throw it back to you. What do you think about potentially playing Teamu? Obviously, I'm not going to get to any Mike DeLeo. I think that's far too aggressive on a slate like this where we have certainty about some of these other quarterbacks. Teamu is a big question mark. Like I said, really tough projection. And I'm not sure if I want like a couple shares as a hedge or if I just want to fade him entirely. What do you think?
Yeah, I think I'm feeling the exact same way as you. This
Okay.
is, I mean, the matchup is like if this were a tougher matchup, it would be just an easy stay away from me because the nice thing is he's 11,000. So like
Yeah.
even if he does get full run, like it's pretty tough to hit that number. Obviously he can get there, but yeah, you feel pretty good about the fade in a tougher matchup at 11,000 because he's playing against Houston, which is, I mean, I guess it's not the best matchup. And like it early on, it kind of felt like the teams could just do whatever they wanted against Houston. They've been a little bit tougher recently. So
It's a pretty good rushing matchup. It's not like a great passing matchup.
Yeah. So I think it's probably a spot where I'm going to be. I don't know if I'll have zero, but I might end up with zero of Jordan Teamu
Okay.
because of the additional risk and because he's probably going to carry some ownership regardless. Yeah, I think there's a pretty good chance that I end up with zero Jordan Teamu. But regardless, if he does end up at 18%, I certainly anticipate being underweight there.
Yeah, I think the big thing for me will just be seeing sort of like where we land on our projection, where the industry lands overall, because that'll obviously heavily influence our ownership projection. If he ends up staying, pretty stagnant around like 15 to 20%, out of 35 teams, I might play him on one or two, maybe zero. If he ends up at like 3 to 5%, if everyone's thinking, okay, Teamu's not going to play a full game, he might only play a half, whatever, then I'm a little bit more interested in maybe playing 8 to 10% Teamu, because we could see a bit of a surprise here. Reggie Barlow, who was the Defenders coach back in the day, he actually played his starters in a meaningless game just all throughout. Shannon Harris hasn't really been indicating that. And like I said, I really feel like this is a team with a lot to lose if Teamu ends up getting hurt. Of course, Neil, these questionable rotations also apply to the other skill players potentially. So Chris Rowland, Cornell Powell, and Braylon Sanders could all see, sort of reduced roles here. And I think the team overall has a lot of confidence in Jaden Mickens and Javon Antonio as backup pass catchers. Those are two guys that I'm very interested in, especially, Antonio, I think, is pretty much a lock to play every snap if Braylon Sanders ends up missing this game. Javon Antonio would be like a fantastic play in that situation. Even if Braylon Sanders goes, I could still see like a 75% route share for Antonio because they'll probably want to rotate Powell out a little bit more. They probably won't want Sanders to get a ton of action given that he's dealing with a back injury. Sanders, by the way, was only at a 30% route share last week because, he was dealing with that injury. I believe it happened at some point late in the first, early second quarter. Yeah, Neil, what do you think about these pass catchers? Are you tempted at all by some of the healthy starters like Chris Rowland or Powell, or are you mostly just looking at Jaden Mickens, Javon Antonio? We might also see Seth Williams, who's expensive for some reason. He's 6,000. He was added to the roster a couple weeks ago. He could come up and earn some outside wide receiver reps for DC.
Yeah, I would say like tempted somewhat, yes. But Rowland, we have projected for 33% ownership. I'll certainly be under that number.
Yeah,
if he ends up there, but like
for sure.
I feel like the risk of fading somebody like Chris Rowland if he does end up playing the full game and gets back to where he was a few weeks ago, like you could just get completely buried by him. So I think I'll have a little bit of Chris Rowland at least, but it's probably going to be like 10 to 15% Chris Rowland because he's expensive enough that it's he could fail even with a full workload. Cornell Powell, I think, we've only got him at 7% ownership. I'd be a little bit surprised if he ends up at only 7% after what he did last week. But maybe if if we're projecting him a little bit worse for the potential split, it could end up there. But I think he's somebody that I would want to fade if he did come in significantly higher than this. But at 7%, like I think he's still a fine bet, even if he does run 75% of the routes. It's a tricky situation because we just really don't know. Like it wouldn't be that shocking if they do just play their starters the whole game. Like it's probably not the most likely scenario, but also I'd say there's a 40% chance that they just play their starters, play it like they want to win this game because they're a football team. They're programmed to want to win. So so I wouldn't be that shocked if they're just playing the guys basically the full game. But yeah, ultimately 33% Rowland is certainly a number I'm going to be pretty significantly underweight on. If 7% Cornell Powell, like I'm count me in for that. I think that would be into it. But yeah, I agree with you. Like Javon Antonio feels like a great play because he's a fine play regardless, and has upside to play more based on other people sitting more. So at 4,400, Javon Antonio, a pretty strong play. Jade Mickens, 4,300. I don't like him as much as Javon Antonio because he was just because I think there's more downside that he just stays in the role that he has been in, which was 18% route share last week and returning some kicks. So there's more risk there. I'm probably not going to be too much over the field there because we're kind of having like for him to get there, you kind of need him to play more than he has been. So you're counting on things breaking that way, and then you're counting on production to follow as well. So if he's getting 11% ownership, that seems fine. But yeah, and Antonio would be the bigger part of my portfolio of the two of them. Anybody else on DC? Braylon Sanders, man, that was one of my bigger stands last week, was playing a ton of Braylon Sanders. So that was disappointing. But yeah, we'll have to wait and see his health. But if he's starting, I'll probably play some Braylon Sanders.
Yeah, it's a tricky spot. I think Sanders would be the guy that I'd be the most willing to get off of, even if he is listed as a starter, because I am a little bit worried about that back injury. And I think they like what they have in Javon Antonio. And like you were saying, with Chris Rowland, Cornell Powell, there still is a chance that they sort of go against that Shannon Harris quote, end up playing their starters. Even if they don't, I mean, Neil, would you be surprised if I told you Chris Rowland scored, say, 23 DraftKings points on a 52% route share? We could be right about this and he could still have a pretty good game. So I'm not going to fade these starters entirely. I think Te'amu overall would be the most tempting fade of the group, him and Braylon Sanders, given that, Braylon Sanders is dealing with the injury. But I really do think this is a good week, especially if you're playing a lot of teams, to try to get exposure to a wide variety of these DC guys. Javon Antonio overall is my favorite play for tournaments. I'll have a good amount of Jaden Mickens too. And yeah, don't want to go into the slate with zero Rowland or Cornell Powell because they can't put up big scores even on a limited snap share. So certainly something to keep in mind. Massive range of outcomes here. I would absolutely remember these projections very, very fragile. So if you have a strong lean, just go for it. I mean, yeah, certainly worthwhile. Backfield, I think, is pretty straightforward. Last week we saw Deion Jackson with a monster game, 21.6 DraftKings points here in 66% of backfield weighted opportunity on a 59% snap share. Abram Smith, 34% of backfield weighted opportunity on a 39% snap share. I'm projecting, I sort of pinch these two a little bit in anticipation of Abram Smith. If they want to rest Deion Jackson a tad, we might see a little bit more Abram Smith. If Darius Hagans ends up active, I wouldn't, in the games Darius Hagans has been active, he's played like one snap, earned one carry. He hasn't done anything. I wouldn't be surprised if maybe he's active this week and he earns 8 snaps and 2 carries or 3 carries, something like that. So we may see him work in a little bit more. Any thoughts on this backfield here? I don't necessarily love anybody for the main slate. Deion Jackson is pretty expensive. And like I said, there are workload question marks. What do you think?
I think I like him better than 10% ownership.
Okay.
Maybe because he's only 8,300. Yeah, I guess your workload concerns are making me hesitate a little bit if I like him better. Okay, I think 10% feels about right. I guess I wish I could take a bigger stand here, but
yeah,
because it is like Houston, like you said, they're a little bit more vulnerable on the ground. Loved like Deion Jackson is clearly taken over as the preferred back here, but Abram Smith has a role regardless, and maybe they don't play the starters quite as much. So yeah, I think ultimately 10% is probably fair.
Yeah, that's about what I'm thinking too. Deion Jackson paired with like the DC defense, I also think is fairly interesting here. I wouldn't be shocked if we just saw the Houston offense, totally fall apart in the face of DC's like very, very aggressive pressure, and a guy like Deion Jackson could benefit. But like I said, this could be a bit more of a pinch backfield in terms of raw workloads. We could see more of a 50-50 split between Deion and Abram Smith. And the problem is, like, if Abram Smith was 4,500, I'd be pretty excited. He'd be like a Jarvion Howard type play. He's 6,700 though. Yeah. So I don't see how you can get to any of Abram Smith outside of the showdown slate, where he is a fairly interesting play as like a flex option, I think. Okay, I think we covered just about everything we need to for the DC side of this. Let's move on to the Houston side of this game. Neil, I think it's it's finally Jalen McClendon's time to shine. Massive total here. Had a pretty strong fantasy performance last week. Houston's up their play count a decent bit. DC is a very aggressive defense that's sort of prone to giving up these big plays. And I also think, McClendon has a little bit of Luis Perez in him, where he really doesn't take many sacks, doesn't throw many interceptions. I think, we haven't seen it yet, but I think this could be a pretty good matchup for Jalen McClendon. Obviously, he's got a massive projection for us and is shaping up to be the most popular quarterback play of the slate. Also, worth noting, no weird rotation question marks here, at least with the quarterback. What do you think about McClendon this week?
Yeah, I'm with you. McClendon feels like a pretty strong play. Like he's one of the few safe clicks at quarterback.
Yeah.
He's the 9,000 price tag, totally fair. This is a game that could have a lot of scoring. Doesn't run as much as I hoped he would. I took some early rushing overs on him, and he just has not been an elite rushing quarterback, even if he does have, he runs a little bit. But just when I guess it's helpful that when he goes off, his pass catchers probably do as well.
Yeah.
It's not my favorite matchup, but like you said, this is one of those unique ones where you don't really know how it's going to play out until you see it, but there is upside. There's kind of a wide range of outcomes against DC. Do they get flustered, or are they just able to make it work against the pressure of DC? So yeah, I think McClendon, one of the stronger quarterback plays on the slate.
Yeah, I agree. When it comes to these pass catchers, this is a little tricky to decipher. Like I mentioned, both Kiki Chisholm and Lawrence Keys missed practice on Wednesday. They also had sort of reduced route shares last week relative to what I expected. Chisholm was at a 59% route share, Keys at 49%, and ended up being, obviously Justin Hall was at his standard, right around 90% route share, but Cyril Grayson, 63% route share, and Emmanuel Butler, 70% route share. Neil, I was a little disappointed because I think you specifically asked me about Emmanuel Butler last week, and I was like, I'm not really going that direction. He was actually out there quite a bit. Of course, that could have been injury related, but to me, we know Justin Hall. Justin Hall's pretty much a lock for a 30% target share. He's a very strong play. He's going to be very popular. But Cyril Grayson and Emmanuel Butler, even if Kiki Chisholm and Lawrence Keys plays, are pretty interesting considering those players are banged up, and we've seen sort of elevated route shares, especially from Butler 2 weeks in a row, and obviously Grayson last week. What do you think about these Houston pass catchers here?
Yeah, if it makes you feel better, I played Emmanuel Butler anyway last week. I was like, I'm gonna, and I think I told you to increase his ownership projection. I didn't tell you this because I was going to single-handedly bring it up by playing 10% Emmanuel Butler, which I don't know if it helped me. Maybe it did on the 2-game slate. But yeah, I think Butler at he's 71% route share last week. Yeah. That was obviously very promising. Good to see. I think that I'm going to be playing Butler once again, and we think he has the talent, so he just needs the opportunity. It seems like the opportunity might be there for Emmanuel Butler. Still, we're not projecting a ton of the field to get there. He's only 5,000, so yeah, I think Butler a fairly strong play when we're already wanting to play his quarterback. Am I reading right that Justin Hall had 16 targets last week?
It was just an insane workload for Justin Hall. Houston ran a ton of plays. Jalen McClendon had 50 pass attempts. So yeah, 30% target share for Justin Hall is something that we see over and over again. And if Houston runs a lot of plays, that's going to mean a lot of targets.
Yeah, and if we're playing, I mean, he's going to be in a majority of my McClendon lineups. I think the 43%, I'm willing to pay it. I'm willing to just be with the field on Justin Hall, given the workload there, even at 9,700. We don't have that many sure things this week, and I feel like Justin Hall is one of those surer things that we have. So I like Justin Hall quite a bit. We're gonna have to see the way things break out with the injury report with Chisholm, and who was the other one you said is on the injury report?
Lawrence Keys. Also worth noting for the showdown slate, Josh Peterson, who's a starting tight end, could potentially miss. He missed practice on Wednesday. If he misses, Neil, this is easily the best name in the UFL. Jorquarius Spivey will likely be your starting tight end for Houston. These tight ends aren't very involved, but for showdown, I'm sure he's going to be the 1K minimum. That would be a little bit interesting there. But continue.
Yeah, that is. I would not know how to pronounce that name. I'm reading it right now.
I hope I pronounced that correctly. I don't know if we've heard it said on.
Seems like a good enough guess to me. Yeah, okay. That'd be interesting. Yeah, I like Butler at very, very little ownership. Cyril Grayson, he's only 3,500, not getting a ton of ownership.
Yeah.
He's pretty interesting after a big increase in workload last week, 63% route share, 6 targets last week. Like, yeah,
Yep.
sign me up for Cyril Grayson also. So I like those two quite a bit. Marcus Sims, I assume, is still out. Is it?
So Sims isn't on the injury report, and
Okay.
I don't know what they're doing with him. Like
He doesn't seem to have, they traded for him and they're just like, we're not going to play him anyway.
Yeah, and he's had games where he's active, not on the injury report, and is out there for like 24% of routes, which is just so weird. So, if Keys or Chisholm misses, I would imagine they get Marcus Sims involved, but like I don't know what they're going to do. And I think, overall, we've seen full-time route shares from Butler and, close to it from Cyril Grayson. We just haven't seen that from Sims at all. So I don't think I'll be able to give Sims a very good projection, but for like the showdown, I would still be interested in Marcus Sims for sure, especially if a Kiki Chisholm or Lawrence Keys is out of this game.
Yeah, I think we're gonna have to wait to see the depth chart. Like that,
Yeah.
that'll be really helpful to see who's listed as starters on the
Absolutely.
depth chart, who's available, all that kind of stuff. We know that we're gonna like Justin Hall. We're probably gonna like Emmanuel Butler, regardless. To some extent, we have 0 ownership going there, so I like him as a contrarian play. I don't mean that I want to play a ton, but for the most part, we're gonna have to wait and see the injury report here.
Yeah, I think that's a good call. The injury report will definitely help us a lot with these wide receivers. I think for fantasy purposes, dream scenarios like Chisholm and Keys are both out, and Sims is listed as the backup while Butler and Cyril Grayson are listed as starters. I think we could pretty safely assume 70 to 80% of routes for both Grayson and Emmanuel Butler, and then Sims probably works in for like a 30 to 50% route share type situation, but we'll have to see. Obviously, a lot of potential variance there with what could come out on the depth chart. Let's talk this backfield, Neil. I was kind of hoping last week that, they just settle on Zaquandre White. They'd say, hey, Zaquandre, you've played well. We're going to give you the ball a bunch, even with 3 running backs active. Unfortunately, Neil, Zaquandre White only at 47% of backfield weighted opportunity. Lingard earned 32% of backfield weighted opportunity. Kirk Merritt was at 21%. I think this is just a really gross 3-way split. Merritt's getting the priority in the passing game. He was at a 47% route share. Also, 42% snap share, which led all of these backs, further muddying the waters here. I don't know if I can get to any of these guys. I mean, Zaquandre's expensive, which is tough. He's 7,900. And then Kirk Merritt's 62. If Kirk Merritt was like 4K, I might kind of like him, but 6,200 just isn't good. And obviously we're not playing Lingard because he only gets empty snaps. I don't think I can get there. We probably have to talk this backfield like showdown specific, right? Because main slate, are you getting to any of these guys?
I think I will. I think I'm going to take a slightly contrarian stance here, just because they're Zaquandre White in particular, just because he's getting such little ownership, and it does really feel like you just never know what CJ is going to do. So it wouldn't be that shocking if we see Zaquandre Wright come out and it's like, oh yeah, obviously he's our lead back. Like, did you see him 2 weeks ago? Whatever. Like I think it wouldn't be that shocking to see Zaquandre Wright out of nowhere get 15 carries and 4 targets this game. So
yeah, okay,
given
that's
the
fair.
price tag, and then the bigger thing is we've just seen DC just like give up explosive runs week in and week out. They've just been so bad at giving up these runs, and I think he's probably the likeliest. I guess Kirk Merritt, can break off a long run also. But we've seen Zaquandre White have those 50-yard carries, and we've seen DC give them up. So just even in limited, even if he does get 8 carries again, I think that he is capable of just breaking one off. So yeah, I think he's going to get 0 ownership. It's kind of been like, has he hit at all in games Kirk Merritt active? It feels like it's just like if Kirk Merritt is out, suddenly he's awesome. If Kirk Merritt's in, he doesn't do anything.
It really has been that simple. And I mean, for what it's worth, like we're not necessarily looking at 0% ownership here. We have 7% projected, 6.7 right now. So, that's tough. I do like, I kind of like your angle. I think that's going to be more of an angle, at least for me on the showdown slate. Like maybe I'll toss out one Zaquandre White captain lineup and just hope like he's the guy. It's really hard to justify though when we have Day Hunter who's like 100 cheaper. Jay Sean Corbin, who we already talked about, 700 cheaper. I don't think I'm going to be able to get there on main, but I do think that's a really interesting contrarian take for the main slate here.
It's risky. It's big risky. Yeah. At the very least, I think you should consider him as a late swap option on the main slate if you're playing from behind. But yeah, I think I probably go into the slate playing over 7% Saquandro. I'll probably have 15%, 10 to 15%, somewhere in that range.
Yeah.
Yeah, taking a bit of a stand, which it's the floor is very, very low. There's a lot of risk here. But yeah, I think I go in with the plans to play some.
Yeah, and I mean, there's also the scenario where if this game's a shootout, like if these teams combine for 60 or 70 points, Zaquandre White could still get you there even on like a 40% snap share if he's getting the majority of the backfield work here. I do think that's an interesting contrarian angle. Maybe I need to think about that a little bit more. I feel like we've covered everything for Showdown. I haven't checked Kirk Merritt's Showdown price, but I'd imagine he's like a somewhat interesting Showdown play. Yeah, I think that's just about. Anybody else you want to call out here as like a late swap Showdown option?
I'd say Kirk Merritt also qualifies as a late swap option if you're if you're playing from behind and you don't have the price for the Squandre, because I think he's shown the ability to break one off, and it's just such a great matchup for running backs who are capable of breaking off a long run. So I would consider him as a late swap option also. And like you said, for Showdown, yeah, both of them are very viable. I don't think I have anything else though.
Yeah, I don't think that I do either here. Yeah, I think that's just about it. Just trying to think DC late swap options. I feel like we've largely covered it. Jaden Mickens would probably be my favorite. I think he will be notably lower owned than Javon Antonio. Well, I mean, we have them pretty similar. I might lower Mickens slightly. Yeah. All right. Well, guys, that will do it for the Week 9 UFL breakdown. Really appreciate all of you who have tuned in, who are interacting on Twitter, Discord, what have you. I'll be sure to get these projections updated as soon as we get tonight's depth charts, and I will see all of you guys at the top of the leaderboards.
What? Why are you shaking your head?
You're welcome.